that collective intelligence is about listening. It's about understanding everybody's role. It's understanding everybody's perspective and understanding that there's more ways to do things than the things that you think you know how.
And that exponential growth cannot come with just the alpha. It's the integration of alpha and omega. And a lot of times, that ability to lean back and truly trusting the process. And nature does this so beautifully.
We are leading from a place of inner impact, meaning we're doing our personal work, we're illuminating our own unconscious, subconscious. Only then can we have like the true positive ripple of impact that I think so many people would like to have. All right, so Tara loves when I hand her microphones.
At least I can hear myself in this
Favorite
one.
thing in the world. Welcome to this conversation about regenerative community stewardship. I'm delighted to be with each of you. We've had the opportunity to spend the last 48 hours together. We've had quite the adventures. And yeah, we've gone deep. We spent many hours yesterday talking about some big themes and subjects and harvested each of our unique perspective around what that means to us, what community stewardship means, and regenerative community specifically. So before we dive into all of the juice that is there, I would love for each of you to just briefly share who you are in the world, who you be, and why and how community is relevant for you. Would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tara. I know lots of familiar faces here. I am living in Mexico and been part of visioning a community down there that many of you are also a part of. And I hope that those that you aren't can also come join. And it's been a beautiful journey. It was a very innocent introduction to just sort of wanting to build a place that I really wanted to live in with my, at the time, romantic partner, now best friend and business partner. And so we really wanted to just craft a world that we wanted to live in, and a place where people could come and collaborate and create, and that was deeply in touch with nature, and just had the qualities that we couldn't find, And so we're calling it our modern version of utopia, and it's called MUSA, and I've been taking on many hats in bringing this thing to fruition and playing many parts. And I think what I'm really excited about the conversation that we've been having that we're going to share today is bringing this word regenerative into the community atmosphere, because for me, regeneration really grounds in nature and the regenerative process and what nature mimics for us, and being a student of just what is. And for me, that has shown up in so many different facets in terms of physically creating a space for community to be truly regenerative, which for me is really about it taking on the life of its own and adapting and evolving with the collective intelligence. So we're going to talk a lot about that today, but it's been my journey. I've been living it and breathing in it and crying in it and laughing in it. So yeah, really happy to be here. Thank you.
And I'll just throw a couple bullet points in there because
It was a horrible introduction.
No, not horrible, just very humble, maybe too humble. MUSA is expanding into what will likely be a 1,000-acre project. Already it's 180-ish.
Yeah, 250.
Or 250 now. So it's massive. And already there's a hotel that's been built. There's a first phase of residential. There's 100 and how many owners are we up to?
126.
126 owners that are already a part of it. And so it's really incredible to go down there and see what has been already created. And also just the depth of devotion that you bring into the stewardship of that particular vision is really incredible. So I just wanted to
Thank you.
Add that and honor that.
Hi, I'm happy to be back here again. I am Astrid Brinck. I am the steward of the Kavana Institute. I'm also the founder of the Inner Freedom Institute in Europe and the creator of the Inner Freedom System, which is a personal transformation tool and intervention for organizations. I've been stewarding and supporting communities for over 30 years now. And to me, this is my passion. This is my life, because I am very interested to understand us humans and what are the ways and what are the new tools or the new technologies that are there that we haven't seen yet or discovered, for us to learn how to thrive together, for us to learn how to be fertile soil together. I really believe in that concept that together we are the fertile soil of our lives. And so that's my passion, that's my interest. And I'm an apprentice of all of that. And I'm an apprentice of all of you and all of us together. And yeah, that's my passion. So thank you for having this theme. I'm so happy you came because Tara really invited us or inspired us to have this theme as part of what we're doing in a much deeper way. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for having me here. The first time when I heard this, it was like, have I, am I part, like I've been creating inherently and I've been connecting the dots. I believe in connecting the dots and seeing magic happen. That's how I embarked on the journey I embarked on right now, 9 years ago. I met my co-founder and he, after 7.5 hours of meeting with the minds, he turned around and he said, we should look at drones. And my first instant answer to him is not my world. And he's like, but data and intelligence and communication and connecting the world is part of who you are. And it took an outsider for a second to kind of be that reflection. And I said yes in a very naive manner. I'm like, yes, let's build near perpetual aircraft that can augment satellites. Yeah, this was 9 years ago. And that's exactly what we're doing. We've built the longest dwell, longest endurance unmanned aerial platform in our size and weight category in the world. When we had mentioned this to Airbus 6 years ago, they'd looked at us and in a very French accent had said, impossible. And we'd said, why? And they turned around and said, physics. We not only did what we said we would do, we've exceeded that by at least 5 times. And nobody really believed. I didn't know how. But it was that journey when you trust the universe and you trust that you can do it. And I firmly believe that a lot of times we're limited by our own imagination. And so when we look at nature and what nature has achieved, that is such an inspiration. We looked at birds. We're like, how do birds fly long distances? How do birds that are jumping off of mountains, what do they use? And we did that. We used that as AI and we built what we've built. And we truly are augmenting space and have become the connective tissue between sea, land, air, and space with a mission to save lives and connect the world, starting with the warfighters. A lot of times when we have these conversations, there are real conflicts that are happening around us. And the biggest threat to our species today is the wars that are happening and the power play. So how do we bring communities and regenerate in a way and show that stewardship to be handling and managing this in an elegance that nature would have? And that is my passion. That's why I love connecting people, bringing communities together. And I think that's why Azria said, hey, you and Astrid, I remember the voicemail, and they're like, no, you need to be part of this conversation. And also bringing all of those concepts back into corporate world. We need different kind of organizations. We need conscious capitalism. But I don't think we've all jointly come together and written how those manifestos need to be created going forward. Right? And I think we are responsible for doing it and mimicking it in the corporate world. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. And you are also, as a co-founder and business owner, you're also the steward of the community and the culture that is the people working in your organization. And I think we can talk more about how you're doing things differently than maybe other examples of leadership. Could you just briefly give us a little bit more of a tangible idea of how what you're doing connects to the humanitarian efforts?
Absolutely. So when you talk about wildlife anti-poaching, Bastian and I've, had multiple debates on how do we bring these kind of technologies. You can't just keep doing the same thing and expect different results. The disasters, the natural disasters, the man-made disasters, satellites are not enough. You need something closer to Earth. When I've worked with oil and gas, so I work with industries, most of us would say a triple bottom line company that believes in people, purpose, and prosperity. I don't even use the word profit. I usually use the word prosperity. Why is a triple bottom line company working with warfighters or with oil and gas companies? And essentially, we can monitor greenhouse gases like they have never been monitored before. When you want to monitor carbon and methane, get closer to earth and have something perpetual or near perpetual doing that. And so those tie-ins sometimes are not becoming part of the conversations. I've sat down with SDG funds and they're like, oh, we are investing in windmills only. Great, but there are other ways of looking at how funding and conscious funding need to be brought into these organizations and tying in hard technologies. We're building AI. If you guys are Terminator fans, and I use this very carefully, we've built very sophisticated flying robots that are self-aware, but we've also built Skynet. What I mean by that is these robots can decision on their own, can work in a group, and can solve mission profiles without needing human intervention. When you embark on a journey like that, unless you're so mindfully conscious about where and how you're going to use technology, if you have Arnold Schwarzenegger coming back trying to save me, you know what's gone wrong somewhere. So yes, so I hope I answered that in a subtle manner.
Yeah. Beautiful, thank you.
Oh.
So I want to just thread the needle a little bit with our last episode that was about inner impact leadership. And there was a lot of themes that emerged that we dove into, but one of the core ones was deep listening. How when we are leading from a place of inner impact, meaning we're doing our personal work, we're illuminating our own unconscious, subconscious, all the parts of ourselves that might, potentially manifest themselves externally in a way that is not in alignment with our intention or what we would like. Only then can we have like the true positive ripple of impact that I think so many people would like to have. And so it's the inner impact that ripples out to have the outer impact. And this theme of deep listening was really present and alive because it's one of the things that I think we often don't do, especially when we're building something large. And, even if it feels like a very sort of new paradigm vision and it's very flowery and beautiful and kind of kumbaya vibes from the outside, like the reality of it is still, you have overhead and you are building spreadsheets and forecasts and you're doing a gazillion Zoom calls, and it's just the reality of building something, right? And when you get locked into that tunnel vision and there's pressure to perform, then a lot of times the listening, the space to even listen falls away. And I've certainly felt the repercussions of that in my own journey of being an entrepreneur. So Astrid, I'd love for you to maybe speak into the listening and also tie that to the legitimate other, which was a theme that came up yesterday that I thought was really powerful and relevant.
Thank you for bringing these two together. I was an apprentice for a long time and an admirer of the work of Humberto Maturana. He's a biologist from Chile, where I'm from. And one of his invitations to humanity is the concept of the legitimate other, meaning when I relate with the other, with my eyes, and when I look at you, I know that you're a legitimate you. And there's nothing that I have to do to change you, but more of a discovery and curiosity of how can I relate with you. And if we're both doing the same, if every dialogue and every conversation is including this powerful way of actually looking at another person and another human or another community or another country, then we really have the fundamentals for real listening to happen. And then listening for me has been something I've observed with the many communities that I work with, that it's something that we're actually lacking. We don't have a framework for listening. And so I have the starting of a framework that I've been kind of working for the last 20-something years. And just 2 days ago, I went deep into the rabbit hole of upgrading that to what is needed today and all the intentions that are behind listening. So am I listening to react? Am I listening to prove something? Am I listening to actually understand? Am I listening to legitimate or legitimize? Or am I listening to be transformed? What is the intention behind my listening makes the whole difference. Because if I'm only listening to make myself right and make you wrong in me, like proving something, it's there's no real listening. And for me, the ultimate expression of listening is that by interacting with you, who you are a legitimate other, I am not the same person at the end of that interaction, because I'm going to be inspired to study, to look at myself, to reflect. Like your presence is going to be an immediate feedback for me to look at who I am and where I can unravel or work with my own resistances to really see who I am, the wholeness of me, right? So it's all tied together. So for me, the interconnectedness of all of that is regeneration, and remembering that we are nature and remembering that we are whole. So I don't really believe that we're becoming anything, but we're actually just remembering and getting out of the way so that we can see that wholeness and that the legitimate other and the legitimate me. If I'm not recognizing myself as a legitimate one, how can I recognize you? So this is why it's so important to do the personal work of getting out of the way so I can emerge fully from within. The part of me that's always been there is just surrounded by so much noise. And yeah.
As the pool pump just decides to be part of the conversation.
And actually, I'd like to add there, living and growing up in multiple parts of the world and not having a sense. I grew up in Dubai, Middle East, and if you guys have been, you know you're an expat. You don't belong. And then I'm Indian and Middle Eastern heritage, and I thought, I'm Indian, so I'll go to India for my undergrad and grad. And I went there, and the first thing, they took one look at me and they're like, you don't look like us. You don't sound like us. No, you're not Indian. I used to ride a Yamaha 650 and I asked a lot of questions. And the first time I felt where I belonged was New York City. I landed there as kind of a semi-adult and, I'm like, this is what home feels like. But I was an illegal alien, because I had visas and I had to, or legal alien. I don't even remember anymore, but I was an alien.
What matters is you were an alien.
I was an alien. In the first place, that felt like home, right? So how do we actually, and as boundaries are in some ways dissolving, but also becoming more rigid, the refugee crisis that we see now with the way the climate is moving and the water shortages and the amount of displacement of human beings that's going to happen, how do we create regenerative communities so we give a sense of belonging to folks who've been displaced? That's, for me, that is why all of this, we can have these conversations, and we're all privileged, right? We have had access, we've seen it nurture. How do you go and then create or regenerate in a way that everybody around the world feels it? And that is why I think what you said is so important. Everybody is legitimate, and honoring each individual and listening. It's so powerful. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might add to that as well. Like, we're in a deep process right now of moving from vision to actuality, and through this transitional phase, this theme has been very, very present in understanding that true community isn't the place that we're building and everybody that's going to drop into it, but it's every stakeholder involved. And when I hear what you're saying about the legitimacy of each individual, we've really been working on that in figuring out how to create the voice for every person that is participating in the project, listening to the community, listening to the environment. And for me personally, as a leader, and it was so beautiful to see how many people are leading community. So you'll feel me, like you feeling like you have to have all the answers, or that you have to have the roadmap. I think a big part of my own personal process in this journey and what community is teaching me is you don't have to have the answers. Like, ask the questions. Be vulnerable, ask for the support, because most of the time, like in that collective intelligence that I was sort of touching on earlier is about listening. It's about understanding everybody's role. It's understanding everybody's perspective, and understanding that there's more ways to do things than the things that you think you know how. So it's been a beautiful part of our journey in this transition of creating the space, but then also where that regeneration and like where that legitimacy of the individual comes for me is the voice that comes through and learning together and adapting and evolving.
Yeah, I feel like the theme of listening or of vulnerability, leading from a different place, it also leads back to this idea of, integration, or the podcast is integrated intelligence. And so what do we mean by that? Well, I believe there's been a split, really, both in every single human being and then in the larger collective manifestation of how we relate to the earth, and really any other species outside of humans, which is this separation, specifically between what we call alpha and omega. And most of our examples of leadership are more on the alpha side of the spectrum. So more about kind of a dominant sort of leadership style, top down, telling others, directing others, guiding others, having the answers, always having it all together, needing to be the strong one. And then the omega side is more of that surrendered, intuitive, deep listening, connected to all the invisible realms, all the subtle realms, right? Listening to the rustling of the wind and the leaves, watching the cycles of seasons and listening to the land, like all of these pieces that have gotten lost in our modern sort of hyper productivity focused culture. And so it's not about throwing out the alpha way, because there's so much beauty in that, and we need that clear linear path towards the goal. But if that's all we have, then we lose something really fundamental. So the integrated leadership style or operating system is when those kind of can come together and really weave in harmony with each other. And I've seen you, Tara, since I've met you, since we started going on this crazy journey together, however many years ago, lifetimes ago it was. I've seen you just soften so much and relax so deeply into yourself and into the people that are around you. And one of the things that I think has been pivotal for myself, and I've seen it happen for you, and I am really excited about it because it's very practical, is this idea of ritual. And not even this idea, but this act of ritual. And so maybe you could share a little bit more about when you say we've been listening to the people that are building this with us, or we're listening to the land. Can you share a little bit more about what that actually has looked like? Because I think when we have rituals in communities, we have a structure and a framework that is replicable, that allows us to have the more difficult conversations, that allows us to be in a more reverent or devotional relationship with the thing that we're building, with the people that we're building with. And ritual is something that we've also lost in our hyper modern culture. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we started building a sweat lodge, a temescal, in May of this year, that has been a really beautiful gathering place. And I think that there's the spiritual component of it, which is so critical and so beautiful. But beyond the sort of traditional wisdom, the ability to just ground in as humans, on the ground, in the dirt, in the sweat, being vulnerable, understanding that strip away the masks, strip away the titles, strip away where you live, what you do, whatever, we're all the same. And so we've been doing the sweats with our team since June, every week. We've been using it. We call it MUSA HR, which we can talk about HR in a second. But it's been this really beautiful opening space for us to just get vulnerable with each other. And also the project has been in a vulnerable moment. And so being able to share that vulnerability and like be in a space that contains it, the womb-like nature of it, has been beautiful. And from the ritual perspective, just the caring of the space, the manning of the fire, the nature of just every week cleaning, organizing, coming together, getting into it, and then from there, we've been using that to kind of also crack open a lot of emotional intelligence work that we're doing with the team. And it's more about providing a voice where there hasn't been one. And we talk a lot about this bridge building that we're trying to do, this better future that we're trying to create, this like where we're trying to go, and using the traditional wisdoms of the past, getting it, simplifying, and then creating the dialogue with the team has just been so beautiful in providing a voice. And so we've just had dialogue of opening it up and saying, hey, like what what feels wrong, or where can we improve, or how can we make life better? And some of the things are so small, and it's just asking the questions and not feeling like you need to know, listening to what those answers are and making small, subtle changes. And the biggest thing is the tiniest change, just being heard and being seen, has made such a massive difference in our ability to define the path moving forward together. And it's been life-changing for me, for sure. I mean, just knowing and feeling the support of the collective. And that's all shit I put on myself. I mean, like, the pressure didn't come from anyone other than myself. But I think that, in using this, especially the sweat has been a beautiful, beautiful process for us to not only commune with each other, but also really communicate with the land and have just access to such beautiful information, and collecting community. So, thank you.
I'll actually take it back to one of the points that you rose about receiving.
Yes, and I want you to talk about HR too.
but I've actually seen exponential growth. A lot of us, when we have focused on the alpha, and we've, you need the doing, the HR, or how do you create, I've created an organization that's post-production, post-revenue, significant revenues. We just got scaling revenue from the Army. They're writing one of the largest checks that they've written for a small business to scale. And I've been blunt and I've said, we will never weaponize it. Our assets are only for intelligence and communication. But what we can enable, it saves lives. And they will back us up. But a lot of times, that ability to lean back and trust the process. We use TTP, a lot of us use trust the process, but truly trusting the process. And nature does this so beautifully. Regenerative aspect of nature is trusting the process, both start and completion. And I have literally touched magic and exponential growth. I don't just say quantum, I've felt it. I've felt my multiple selves in multiple dimensions, and I might lose some of you guys saying this, but working for me, with me, and for where we're headed. And that exponential growth cannot come with just the alpha. Mm-hmm. It's the integration of alpha and omega, and truly that leaning back has, so that magic, really, really. Mm-hmm. And then starting with people, when you bring HR, it's an interesting aspect. The word resource has always bothered me. I don't think human beings are a resource. We're not using a resource. And so I sat with that dilemma for a long time. And somehow the word source has been a powerful, we're source. Mm-hmm. We are connected to source, and we are creating by connecting to source. So we're actually source. And I have a lot of very heady engineers. And I get on the phone and I'm like, we're going to end all calls with gratitude when you talk about ritual. That took us through COVID. We grew 3 times and we built aircraft. So we had to be physically there, deal with those challenges. I moved my organization from New York City to the Bay Area and tripled in size during COVID. And we would end every conversation with gratitude. And, it was very interesting. I'll end at this, but that ritual, my co-founder lost his mom to COVID. And we were having our weekly calls with everybody globally. And we said, we're going to end with gratitude. And he broke down in front of the organization. And nothing brought us together. So now when I get on the call and I interrupt anybody saying, oh, what kind of resources are we bringing on? I'm like, are you talking about team members? Are you talking about the actual creators of what we will be building and creating? Then you're talking about source. You're not talking about resource. And I've actually interrupted 3-star generals in these conversations.
I love that about you.
But it's you have to, the way you do one thing, you do everything in life, right? You can't have dichotomies. And so
that's beautiful. And I think that's a beautiful segue also, Astrid, for you to share a little bit about, so one of the, it's like, okay, alpha and omega, high level sounds great, right? We're all on board. But then if you really look at the omega side of the spectrum, it's also the destruction, the decay, the death, the composting, the dark soil, the dark womb. It's all the things that also scare the shit out of us collectively. And so, of course, we don't want that in our business, right? That feels messy and hard to control and hard to manage and all the things. And yet, if we deny that, then we suppress something energetically that is there, that is lurking, that is inevitably going to find a way to express itself. And usually in a way that's damaging because it has been suppressed and has been, supercharged through that suppression. And so tying sort of this idea of endings, of completions, of death, of grief, and also of how we can use ritual to support us through that. Astrid, you've been doing this work for decades. Share with us a little bit of how do you illuminate that subject, especially for the communities and the organizations that you work with?
Thank you for the question. This is one of my biggest passions, is the understanding of the full circle of life. We are born and we all die. And we live life as if we were never going to die. And we start projects as if they're supposed to grow forever and ever. And embracing death, embracing the ending, is what allows us to really live a full color life. And so we need frameworks for endings. We need frameworks for death to be able to be present in every room and in every conversation and in every organization. When somebody leaves the organization, when a project or a stage of what we're doing or an idea, it flourished and then it died. How do we harvest that? How do we allow that to become the fertile soil? And so all endings are related to the fertile soil where we actually plant the future. And so here it goes: loss, grief, endings, ritual, legacy. All of these themes really go together in a beautiful tapestry of being the bridge between what we've learned from the past. But for that, we really need to embrace death. We really need to embrace the endings. We really need to embrace the rituals of completion. How do we actually find completion and own the gifts of that which was ended? And I can bring it to the next stage. Or I recently went to a beautiful ending in a relationship that we harvested everything from that which ended, but now we're putting it in the new shape of that relationship, which is something else. But if we would have not done those rituals, we could be in the old paradigm of conflict and resistance with the ending. Like, we live in a society that denies death and denies endings. And when we're able to actually end with the same love that we start things, and with the same reverence that we start things. For me, reverence is such an important thing. And it's an ever-present part of our lives. And how do we bring ritual there? Like, ritual is also something that is marking the cycle, the rhythm. You were talking about rhythm. And the rhythm of life, love, and death. Again and again and again. And the same as if we look from far away, we're just a dot in a much bigger complex system of life. It's not about us. In this moment, we are the ones in color, that we are, through grief, through those rituals, through the understanding and the embracing our losses. And like, our ancestors can be something we lost, but actually in the loss, in the grief, is a treasure. So I'm bridging the past of who lived behind me with the future, but I cannot let that bridging take away my present, where I have to be fully here, feeling what's alive and what's death with the same love. Yeah.
And you mentioned reverence,
Yes.
and I'd love for you to share was it Confucius?
Yes, the followers of Confucius and Confucius himself, and also in ancient Greece, they really believed. I am very inspired. This has been my word for my personal path. I always have a word, and now it's been for like 2 years inside me, reverence. Like, this is my path back home. So I love that someone here brought reverence. And Confucius and his followers and the ancient Greek, they both agree, these two groups agree, that actually a leader with no reverence is a dangerous leader, because only a leader with reverence will not fall in the temptation of acting as a god. and will never do things to hurt people. And so this is for me the omega, or the feminine quality of reverence. If we bring that to our organizations, to all of them, it's not only alternative organizations, all of it. I've been working in like very masculine worlds, bringing this feminine reverence presence, and for most people it's very well received. I have a really wonderful experience of bringing grief and endings and completion, and it makes sense because we're all humans and we all die and we all experience loss and we all struggle with it. So it's for me, it's a virtue that we need to bring back to the present in a much more significant way. Yeah.
Beautiful. You mentioned, you touched on conflict, and that's we could do a whole episode just on that, just on the gift of conflict and how to work with conflict in community building, or just in general with life. I'd love for you to share about a very special clause that you have in. I think it's really powerful because, again, it's not being naive. It's not. We talked about the difference between innocence and ignorance. Like there's the innocence that can be earned because we went through the phase of being ignorant and thinking and maybe having rose-colored glasses and then realizing, oh shit, it's actually much harder than we thought, and then coming full circle back into innocence, but from a place of choice and awareness. And I think this clause also, I think, is a beautiful expression of that.
Yeah, so when there's no roadmap for what you're doing and you know that there could be potential problems, like a lot of what we did was tried to plan without knowing how to make rules, how to kind of create a backstop if problems were going to happen, because you can't anticipate all of the different things that are going to happen. So in our first phase, we created a harmony clause, which is part of our contractual agreements, which is basically a don't be a dick clause. But what it does is it basically just says that if you disrupt the harmony of the community at any point, no questions asked, money back, out you go. And in reality, that would be extremely difficult to enforce legally. You know, people are buying property, they did it. But what it did was it illuminated the kind of person that wouldn't sign that. And it's like, if you can't sign a clause that don't be a dick, like kind of a dick.
Filter. Filter.
So it became a filter. And I think that, again, like we're really learning as we go. We're building the ship as we're going out to sea. And so I think that, you know, like for all of you that are building communities, what's been a valuable tool for me is how do you create those boundaries or that net around your belief system, even if you don't know how to do it. How do you create putting it forward right from the get-go that just says, like, this is not what we're about, you know, and we don't know what that could look like. And I could, you know, you could get a lawyer to try and turn that into 500 pages of garbage. But, you know, like, I think we tried to keep it really simple. Like, harmony is of the utmost importance. And if you mess with that, the community collective is going to say no thank you. And we've actually invoked it, which has been interesting. People change, circumstances change. The person that you know in January of this year, 2 years from now, could be a completely different person.
Regeneration.
It's regeneration. And so, like, this death cycle that we're talking about is very real. It's real in relationship. It's real in life. It's real in mental health. It's so real. And when you put a bunch of people together, you have no idea what's going to happen. It's just, you know, a whole thing. So
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you're talking about, like, this clause is a way of preventing conflict. And what do you do at MUSA when there is conflict, actually, when it's right there in front of you?
I mean, with the clause wasn't necessary. It wasn't built with the idea to prevent conflict. It was built with the intention to say, like, if you're not right, like, if you're going to be the cancer, we need to be able to cure. You know, like, it was anticipating, because sometimes that happens communities are living, breathing organisms. We're all cells, part of that, and cells change and they morph and they cause problems. And so the clause was to give us collectively an eject button if it was needed. And so in this situation where there was a conflict that was completely disrupting the harmony, we were able to call on that, to have an honest conversation and say, hey, this doesn't feel like the right fit anymore. And what was beautiful about that is they were in agreement. It wasn't, we didn't have to have a big explosion. It wasn't like it was like, hey, like, this is what's going on, and like, you've got a lot going on that doesn't work here, and they were in agreement. And it's a no money back, or all your money back. It's not like a you're out, we take your money, get out. Like, it's very peaceful. But it was a dialogue starter that would have been extremely complicated if that wasn't there.
Yeah, I love that it's a dialogue starter. Because from the systemic perspective, like, exclusion is the first cause of conflict.
Yes.
And so how do you find the balance between this clause, or this way of like the eject bottom, and not really falling into the trap of exclusion? And how do we have inclusion and order at the same time? And I think this is the thing that we've been trying to do for the past, how many thousands of years we've been here?
And I think I'll add to that, and I'll bring an organization's perspective. The word that resonates for me is alignment. Right? It's not about good or bad. It's not about you don't fit in. It's about alignment. And so even at an organization level, when you bring in a lot of passionate people, there is a level of fire that comes with it.
Also diversity, right?
Yes,
Diverse
exactly.
perspectives.
Diverse perspectives, and the ability to listen. And if you've created those as your value systems, you're going to listen, and then also listen to misalignment. And this is not just in team members but partners, investors, customers. Everywhere there is an aspect of alignment. And if you are driven by that value systems, that, is the common alignment based on which a community is coming together, whether that be a corporation or a community at MUSA. And if there is misalignment because we're morphing and changing and allowing for that change, it's okay to identify that misalignment and honor that, and then have the separation as nature will do. Nature does separate out certain species that might be disrupting, whether that be a lionfish while you go see an environment in water, and it's okay. That is part of it. And also, one last thing I'll add from the cycle of completion or death is, it also, once you accept it, there is a level of freedom, because you don't let it be something that you're fearful of. Where there is fear, there is scarcity. Where there is acceptance, there is abundance, and there's trust. And that is where I think, for me, that was such a huge shift. But I think communities, definitely.
Beautiful. So belonging has come up now. Exclusion and then also belonging. So that's a juicy subject. What is healthy belonging versus unhealthy belonging? Astrid.
All my passions in one conversation. This is something I also have been diving deep, understanding belonging and the connection with a good place. And how do we create belonging where there's freedom? Freedom for both parties, the community and the member, to change their minds, to exit, to come in, to come out, and to be in movement of life. Because the good place is not like a static place, right? And belonging is, it's also something that evolves. It's not something that it's a one thing, I belong here, right? But in the depth of belonging, the longing for belonging that we all have is actually related with a deep feeling of self-worth. That I am whole, that I am worthy, and that I am me, and that there's a legitimate me. And that is what we're searching for when we're exploring belonging. So we go through many different layers of belonging throughout our lives, like belonging to the family or the system where we grew up, the exploration of belonging, all the different communities and groups that we join to discover who we are, what part of me is awake and what not, and then the communities that we give birth to or that we nourish also give us a sense of belonging, all in a different way, related. The healthy belonging here goes, it's a community where there's a good balance of reciprocity, of giving and receiving, where everyone has a deep sense of having a good place, that there's a good place inside this community, inside the system. And that good place can change. Like, you're not stuck in that good place. This is also very important because sometimes we find a good place, but maybe the rhythms or the cycles of the organization are going up, and maybe you and your life are going down. And maybe you are in a role that it's up, but now you need to go down. Like, how do you find all of these ideas of life present in healthy belonging for organizations? So it's not only, these are the rules. If you fit, yes. If you don't, you don't. Like, once somebody is in, how do we help that person find their full rhythm in the different stages that we're in, taking care of that person? And if the good place for that person is not inside, is outside, then honor. And then how do we bring reverence again to the good place, to the changes, to the transformation, and to the endings? And exiting as well. Yeah. And sometimes we need to connect with the idea of ends in order to have deeper intimacy. And that's one of the biggest gifts of conflict in belonging. Like, the conflict is, I don't belong anymore. What do I do? Right? And just recognizing that and dying together to the idea that actually maybe we don't belong together. Oftentimes, that's what creates a deeper sense of intimacy and real connection. So let's not be afraid of endings, of conflict, of life, of for it to be messy. Like, we've created symptoms. We have hygienized death. We have hygienized relationships. We want everything to be perfect, and a little bit of mess is wonderful. And that's the fertility of nature, that we are. We're not on the planet. We are nature. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I guess the last two themes that I want to bring before we start to land the ship, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So if anyone has a question, feel free to start to ponder what that might be. The third word of our very lengthy title is stewardship.
Yes.
And we haven't talked about stewardship yet. So I'd love to open that idea, that concept of stewardship up. Because we could have called it regenerative community building, but we called it stewardship. And so is there any, I'm going to just let you choose who would like to speak.
I can start there. Words are very powerful, right? And how you use words. And literally, the first conversation, I want to go back, and my co-founder, it'll be I'm like, what if we don't call ourselves co-founders and we call ourselves co-stewards of this organization? Because there is an aspect when you talk about ownership that actually sometimes creates conflict with regeneration. You are married to a certain concept. You're married to owning and having ego associated with that ownership. If we become stewards of something, or custodians, I like to combine those as well, we look at it differently. We truly look at the larger good, as you talked about, the good place, and then allow for that regeneration, that death, that start, all of those cycles that are needed for regeneration. And I think that is such a beautiful combination of bringing in the feminine along with that aspect of creation. And hey, singularly, I want to go and achieve something. But then if I'm a steward, I'll allow for lean back and change and different aspects to come in that might not be my own creation, but I'm allowing. So I think stewardship allows.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll add on that. I think there's two components of it that are really present for me when I hear what you're saying. Is also in the ownership category, or when you're a leader that feels like they have to have all the answers, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, is that there's this pressure and this weight that doesn't allow you as the leader to be in your good place, because you're feeling the weight and the pressure of everything that you need to and how you need to perform. And so being the guardian or the custodian or the steward, or however you want to think about just being that sort of vehicle of embodiment of how you show up and how you act and how you represent the vision is like, for me, what is very present. And secondary to that, I think, especially in our situation, land ownership is a real thing, right? And I think that what we've been really talking about and what's been really present is the protection of place, and keeping that higher purpose of the collective at the forefront of that purpose, or that of prosperity, right? Prosperity for all. And I think that it gets tricky with land ownership, because it that's a construct in the paradigm that we're in, right? And it's real, and there's papers and legalities and all of the things around that. But I think what we've tried to elevate to is really understanding how it's about protection, and stewardship is a big part of that. Is holding that space so that we can actually keep the collective, whether that's the culture, whether that's the resources, whether that's the community, the employee versus the guest experience, how people are also going to come and help nurture and support that vision. That's been really present in stewardship for me.
Brings us also, I think, to this theme of reciprocity that we didn't really fully go into, but I think is such an important thing. So reciprocity, just the basic of it is like the giving and the receiving and the equilibrium between those, which is very present in indigenous cultures, and something that we've sort of lost and forgotten mostly in our modern culture, which is more of an extractive colonial mindset culture. I was here first, so I get the biggest piece of the pie and everyone else is screwed, is kind of the operating model that most of what we see here is built upon. And so how do we rewire that, especially when we're actually doing business too, right? When there's a business component to what we're building, and there's finances that are part of that, and there's fundraising that's part of that, and there's revenue, and there's all these other things that sometimes can feel like a very dissonant energy in the larger context of the conversation that we've been having, because when you have investors, for example, and they have expectations for certain returns that you've promised when you were fundraising, and then you're like, no, we're just going to be in the listening. We're just going to trust. How does that doesn't necessarily always go over so well. And so I do think the subject of money in terms of, building new paradigm organizations or communities is a crucial subject that we can't overlook. And it's also can also be one of the greatest challenges, sources of conflict, and also energy leakage points, where there's just so much energy that can start to go into trying to figure out how to do that in a good way. Because you were talking yesterday about this tension of being sort of we're trying to build something new that is built on a different operating system, but we're still dependent on some of the original, or call it the default way of operating. And sometimes it feels like you're in the middle and you're being pulled in both directions, and it can be quite uncomfortable. So what would you share, especially for those listening to this that are, maybe trying to call in financial allies or funding for their projects or wanting to expand their vision? What are some of the learnings that you can share that might be valuable?
Go ahead. I mean, we have the same story. No, I think for me, it's been really grounding into the energetics around the money, and the money being the right and the alignment, getting back to the alignment. For me, it's all come down to alignment, and that's been really difficult. It remains difficult. Even in this moment, we've struggled to create the capital cash flow, and I think it's because we were talking to the wrong people and saying the wrong narrative. We weren't ready to receive because we weren't aligned in being so articulately clear about regenerative profitability, which is what we're calling it, is this infinite loop of absolutely for profit, but all of that profit going back into purpose. And then through that purpose, creating so much value that generates more profit that goes back into the purpose. And again, it's where every stakeholder,
I love this.
every stakeholder is benefiting. And I think that as we bridge build towards this new paradigm, landing in that and owning that, and like you said, your triple bottom line and with prosperity is so key, because prosperity means everyone is
We're
prosperous.
not profiting from one or the other.
Exactly.
Right? And it's truly that commitment and alignment.
100%.
Is also the ability to say no. When we've gone and had investment conversations, I've never referred to them as investors. I've referred to them as investment partners. And if you're inviting partners, you will think of how they will prosper as well, right? Along with the organization or the foundation that generates revenue. I sometimes say, things that kind of invoke dialogue, and I say nonprofits are an interesting concept. I don't know if I can fully get. I'm like, you want the best minds working after the largest problems we have. Let's fund them as if they are the largest problems. So then why wouldn't I create prosperity from those projects and make them nonprofit? Some causes are absolutely nonprofit, but it's an interesting aspect of purpose driven. You start with people, and I think sovereignty and dignity for all, that's what we spoke about earlier, and allowing that even for animals and everything living. How do we honor that, bring that into the purpose, and then create prosperity for all? And I think that's where we align so well with what even MUSA is doing.
Yeah.
So.
And also saying no to millions of dollars when you really need them is not easy.
And trusting the process. I literally, and I'm sorry, I'll use an anecdote here, but earlier this year, January, I walked away from a PE deal that I was working on for almost a year. Somehow their words just did not match up to the negotiations that they did with us for a whole year. And I walked away. It was over an email, and I'm like, no, sorry, this doesn't feel aligned. After a whole year, we were long form documents about to sign. And I just knew that it didn't feel aligned. Fortunately, we got the call from the Army 6 weeks later. I didn't have any confirmation of that call. Some might say that's too naive, but I don't think so. I've been doing this for 9 years. And we've got positive EBITDA today and positive EBITDA tomorrow. And I'm bringing these words in purposely because a lot of times these conversations don't involve those words.
Yeah.
But we are definitely for prosperity for all, global prosperity.
Yeah.
And we will prosper in the process.
I really love what you bring around prosperity and what you were saying about reciprocity and this balance of giving and receiving. And I'm always trying to find the intentions, and we can have personal intentions as a person, but also as an organization. And there's a lot to say, but I just want to touch one point about the process of evolution of reciprocity, and that balance is that in one of its stages, we give to receive. And in another stage, we actually receive to give. So sometimes we need to create a space in us to be able to receive whatever that is that we're receiving, but it's not even for us. The act of receiving as an organization, as an individual, is actually creating the possibility to give something to someone else. So it's not ending, and it's not I receive and that's it. It's an entire ecosystem of giving and receiving, and it's not about me only. So when we have a wider perspective of that reciprocity and that prosperity, it's like allowing the movement to continue again and again. I receive, I give, I give, I receive. It's not a transactional life. It's an ecosystem of balance of giving and receiving. And now it's giving. Now it's giving. I give it all. Now it's receiving. I receive it all. And to be able to be in this dance of freedom, and if life is giving you, take it in, because you're giving someone else the possibility to give. And if you're giving, give it all, because you're giving someone else the possibility to receive. So I love this idea of dancing reciprocity and prosperity. Yeah.
I just briefly want to touch on the nonprofit piece, because I was listening to Lynn Twist speak about this, and she for those of you that don't know, she wrote The Soul of Money, and she's been a steward of she's been a bridge really for resources to flow into nonprofits for many decades. And she talks about how it's so outrageous that the entire sector of that world is defined by what it's not. It's not for profit. The entire thing is defined by what it's not versus saying it's social profit. Actually affirming what the thing is for, not saying what it's not. And like reframing that completely. I just wanted to throw that in there because I think it's such I think there is such a negative association with nonprofit. And of course, the words we use to describe the thing are actually totally off. And I think language is such a big part of this. Like, how are we talking about these things and how are we framing these things? And for me, what I'm learning, and I'm very early on the fundraising journey, but what I'm really understanding deep in my listening is fundraising is just storytelling. That's it. That's it.
Aligned storytelling, right?
Aligned story. And you can tell a lot of different stories about the same project, the same vision, the same mission. And however you tell that story, like it's almost like the digits of a combination code lock. The words you use are going to unlock different people in different places. And so if you're in a paradigm of like, I have to appeal to the default world investor who's looking for this massive return and who really only cares about the bottom line, and I'm going to make my whole vision try and fit that person's idea of what it should be, well, I can tell that story and I'll attract that person. But what if I tell a different story? What if I upgrade the story that I'm sharing? Can I trust so fully that there are people out there who are looking for that version of the story and who are interested in investing in the project because that story opens something for them where maybe the money is third or fourth priority, but not the number one reason that they're getting involved. Because there's so many other forms of ROI, right, as well. Like, let's redefine ROI. We talk a lot about ROI as ripple of impact. And we've been doing these ripple of impact series at MUSA. And I just love the idea of redefining concepts and ideas that we all take for granted in our world. Is like, oh, this is just what it is. But why? Why can't we change the definition?
I have a question for you.
Please.
Because you're talking about storytelling and the narrative. How would you, because you are gifted in storytelling, and how would you express the concept of regenerative coherence in storytelling?
Regenerative coherence.
Yes.
Dang it. They were so close to being done with this. Now you just threw a curveball at me. Generative coherence. Okay, well, coherence is a word that you've used this word a lot since I've known you. And I think, if I'm honest, for a long time, I didn't really know what you were talking about. It's like, she's okay, sure, coherence. But I think what I'm learning is that I relate to coherence as some form of order or alignment.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the way I can best relate to it is when, alignment can feel also like a very conceptual thing. But for example, like if my mind, the things I'm thinking about, the things I'm working on, my goals, are in alignment with how I'm feeling, my emotional body, are alignment with how my body's feeling, the state my body's in, my physical, intelligence. And then my spirit, my soul, the part of my higher purpose. And those are all kind of coming into one straight line, alignment. Then something clicks open. And so that to me is a form of coherence. And that can also, I think coherence I associate more with groups. So when I think of coherence, I often think of the field that is generated, the collective energy field that is created when people come together. Because all of us have this auric field that extends outside of our body, this invisible part of us. And when we come together, they start to overlap. And they create this geometry. And that geometry can be coherent, meaning it can make beautiful shapes. Or it can be kind of frenetic and frantic and maybe rub up against each other and have, dissonance and friction. And so to bring coherence, it's kind of tying all the things together, like the listening to what is true. Because if you're in a group of people and what is true is there's contraction, like there's certain people who are having contraction around what's happening, and you're not listening to that, then you can't have a coherent field. So regeneration would say, okay, let's not be afraid of whatever that death moment is that we need to go through as we face this contraction. Like, let's let our ego die. Let's let our attachment to what we thought it should be die. Let's actually hear the truth of what is. Let's welcome that. And then through that active listening, we can come into a state of coherence.
Boom.
Regenerative coherence.
Nailed it. And I think you're tying in with feelings is an important aspect, right? We literally have feelings.
We
They're
have
like,
feelings. I
how-
have
how
many
do we-
feelings.
and he's in every way, right? As part of our organizational manifesto, there are 3 feelings we work with: compassion, passion, and joy. And I tell a lot of times there are words that we use that might not always resonate, but feelings usually do. And I tell all my team members, when you walk into your meetings with your customer, with your own team members, see if you can connect with those 3 feelings of compassion, passion, and joy. And if they're missing, there's something missing there. And don't always avoid that and listen to that, right? And so tying in with the body and the feeling of knowing when there is coherence as well is just such a powerful thing that you tied it with.
Beautiful. Yeah, this idea of all is welcome. Like, even if our ethos, our values, our joy and passion, maybe someone's in a deep grief moment or having a really hard day. And how can that be welcome too? And we don't have to force everyone to be on the joy train all the time, you know? How can that be included? And I think that's where the coherence ultimately comes. Yeah. The integration. I'm going to land it with integration. Integrating all the seemingly separate parts into an expression of wholeness. Beautiful. Well, thank you for this wonderful, gorgeous conversation. I feel very inspired by all of you. And it makes me, when I lie in bed at night and I think about the state of the world and all the intense things that are happening and all the crises and just the moment that we're in collectively, the thing that gives me more than hope knowing is seeing the humans like yourself who are standing in roles of leadership and taking on the big projects and saying, like, screw it. I'm going all in, you know? Like, I'm not going to play it small. I'm not going to play it safe. I'm going to go out and do the thing, and I'm going to fall on my face, and I'm going to pick myself back up, and I'm going to do it 100 times over, because that's what life is asking of me, and life is worth it. Life is worth it.
Yeah. Thank you for saying yes to that yourself, Azria, and recognizing it in others. That is so powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.